continuing on our coverage series. We did already a couple videos on some of the basics, quarters, palms, even the new stuff with the cover 2 man match principles. We could probably keep going with some of the 2x2 stuff with like cover 3 match, maybe some cover 1, some other things. But I wanted to maybe switch it up a little bit and go into trips and talk about this little coverage called special, which is basically the default auto check that you get when you call cover 4 palms, or if you call cover 6 in this game. Okay, and the rules when you think about match coverages, they're mostly, you think about 2x2. You think about 2 receivers on one side, 2 receivers on the other, and a back somewhere in there that'll make one of those sides strong. Because naturally it kind of flows, right? When you think about your defensive coverage, you think of 2 corners on the outside and 2 safeties, right? 2x2. So the question is now, when you have something that's over rotated to one side, where you have 1 receiver on one side and 3 receivers on the other, how do you handle that? Do you kick a safety over from the weak side to the strong side? Like, say, cover 3 match, you might rotate over and this backside guy might play the middle post. Or if we talk about how quarters plays trips, which we'll get into maybe the next video, he's maybe not playing a middle safety, but he's kicking over and helping on this side over here. How special handles this is its extra vertical player basically is the nickel defender. And so typically you don't see, this type of coverage. And I think also it might be the reason why, like in Madden, if you go to, let's say, like 4-3 or 3-4, you tend to not see as much palms. I think a lot of those base looks, if they have anything, they have quarters. Not too many of them have quarters and palms, just because typically, again, once you get into trips, you want that nickel to be that third vertical defender, right? Now, the funny thing is, and we'll go into this in deep detail, just like all the other videos. But before that, it's, when you talk about special, which is coverages, or you might hear other words for it like Stubbie. I think there's many other names as well, but I think the developers have been calling it special, so I keep calling it special. I would honestly rather they go with actually calling palms in this case, because really, the one difference here, the offense is taking 1 receiver and bringing it to the other side. But now, really, the coverage plays a lot different than what you expect in 2x2 palms. And we already went over that video, right? Where it's kind of like cover 2 type of thing. Where special gets, some similarity to palms is that, and again, we'll get into it, you get this triangle right here. The safety, the hook defender, and this apex defender playing a triangle 3 over the 2 inside receivers, the number 2 and the number 3. So in a sense, there is a palms element to this coverage, but basically everywhere else you're man coverage. Okay? Basically everywhere else you're man coverage. I would honestly rather they go with actually playing palms here, similar to how quarters in this game, it plays quarters, right? It plays quarters over 1 and 2, and it brings this safety over to play 3. And this guy's kind of free. He's a low defender to play underneath and to help fit the run better. And similarly, just like I went over in the palms videos, having that kind of free underneath defender to be able to tuck in and, play, the D gap or the C gap, even in some cases, is really, really nice in terms of the run. Plus, I think it's more intuitive, right? It's already difficult in the sense that the game doesn't really teach the player what the coverage is. If I learn palms and I start playing palms and then I play it against trips and it plays completely different, I'm going to be kind of confused, right? And so that's kind of my thinking, is that I wish they had, and they've been using special from the start, but I wish they actually played palms here, where it's the triangle is over 1 and 2. So you have this triangle over 1 and 2 rather than 2 and 3, and you're kicking the safety over to play number 3. Now, that creates some difficulties where you're really isolated on the backside, but then in that case, when you get into coverages like cover 6 Willie, or even other future coverages, then it probably makes more sense to play special, where now you get the nickel involved on the vertical, because we can't make use of this safety because he's doing some busy work on the backside. And the backside itself we'll go over in other videos. In this video, I really just want to talk about, because again, we're going to go over in absurd detail all of the fine intricacies of this 4/3 coverage right here, which is the nickel, the corner, the safety, and the hook over these 3 receivers. Anyway, so that's kind of my small gripe at the beginning. It would be cool if there was an actual palms, like trips coverage with the kind of solo poaching back safety. But in any case, we have special here, and there's a lot of things to talk about. So let me just go ahead and reset the play. We're going to do right away all of the rules and all of the considerations with leverage, alignment, how things actually play versus how they should play, and all that stuff. And while I may talk about some certain run game considerations throughout, I'll kind of reserve a portion towards the end of the video to talk about some key things you should think about in the run game when you're calling palms against trips, which is special coverage. Probably in future videos, I'm going to go more into the run game aspect, because really the coverage call and the run call, like your run consideration and your coverage consideration, should really go hand in hand, and they really depend on the formation, the offensive formation that you're getting. But again, don't want to go, these videos are already insanely long. Don't want to go too crazy long. Anyway, so run stuff towards the end. So let's talk about rules here. So let's go starting from the corner. So starting from the corner, this guy is man-to-man on number 1 everywhere he goes. Obviously, it shows a deep zone quarter, which is obviously, this game at some point really needs a total overhaul in terms of the play art, because there's absolutely no case, there's nothing that can happen in this play that this corner will ever go into that deep zone quarter. He is, for all intents and purposes, man-to-man just like this. And you could do this yourself, and the coverage will play exactly the same. Now, it's tempting to just say that this guy's man-to-man on number 1, and let's move on to the rest of the guys, because man-to-man, there's nothing really interesting there. But really, it is quite interesting, and there's a few considerations that we need to take into, because really the play is what's the wording I'm looking for? You kind of make or break the play depending on this one key aspect, the fact that the corner is man-to-man on number 1. Okay, so let's put him back in that outside quarter zone. The thought here with special is that number 1 is really far away, and there's a few defenders and a few receivers between the quarterback and that number 1 wide receiver, and he's over there right by the sideline. The thought here is that the offense isn't likely going to throw to that guy, just because, it's a long throw, and if you're throwing something like a comeback or a stop route or even a fade, it's a long throw for kind of a lower percentage pass. Okay, so what you want to do really is just cancel that guy out. And then rather than playing 4-on-3, which is pretty difficult, like that level of coordination, it's late in the day, so my talking is even worse than it usually is. That level of coordination to get all of those 4 guys properly matched over all the different route combinations on 3 is really difficult. What is much more manageable is 3/2, these kind of triangle coverages. So you're saying number 1 is unlikely to get the ball on any really difficult routes. let's just cross him out and let's play 3/2. And this 3 is like basically the palms situations that you get in just regular 2x2. It's just you're kicking it over. So you can think about it this way: is like, let's take this guy out, and basically we're playing 6-on-6 rather than 7-on-7. Or I don't know why I said that. You're basically playing 4 receivers on 6 defenders rather than 5 receivers on 7 defenders. But the reality of the situation is, that's easier said than done, especially at higher levels, right? Like if you're talking about NFL, and especially when you're talking about video games like Madden, where you have these laser arm quarterbacks and you were playing on a controller. It's really easy to get those throws out, that type of thing. Getting the ball out to number 1 isn't that difficult. Okay, so that actually brings him into play, number 1. Number 2 right here is what's going on with this interaction between the corner and the receiver. Okay, so there's a few things to say here. Number 1 is this is a man-to-man matchup where the corner truly has no help. Okay, and you don't get too many of those situations in other coverages. Now, he does have help, like 7 yards to the left of him, which is the sideline, and that's great. But you also have a whole lot of field inside. So if you think about cover 2 man, you think about cover 2 man, you can play a hard inside technique, really hard inside technique, knowing that you have help over the top and you have the sideline. If you're talking about cover 1, you can play off, knowing that at some point, okay, maybe it's a little bit far off, but at some point you're going to have a hook defender, a rat defender that can help you out. Even say in cover 0, okay, in cover 0, you're kind of letting those underneath routes you're letting them beat you there because, maybe you're running it on 3rd and long or 4th and long, and you're hoping the blitz gets there. You're hoping that, they'll, you just don't want to give up 10 plus yards, that type of thing. But in this case, as kind of a base coverage, you don't want to be letting drags go free at any point. So you don't want to play off, right? If you're playing off, even if you have an inside alignment that helps you on things like posts and dig routes, the geometry still is kind of against you, right? So if I play this guy off, and of course what I say, or when we think about this, we think about intuition and in reality, right? Because the corner is so far off, he's at a disadvantage on quick routes inside. Now, the reality of this situation is there's ratings at play, there's weird intricacies with the game that kind of play out all differently, but let's kind of show you here. So you can get this situation where you get a step or two inside the corner, and you can just run that all game long. So the idea here is that you're playing press here. You're playing press on that wide receiver so that you're right there, right in front of him. The geometry is now back in your favor. You're playing inside and right immediately ahead of him. So now if he tries to run something inside, well, you're right there. You're kind of taking that out of the picture. So that's the idea, that this guy needs to be press man-to-man on that outside wide receiver. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense to run this coverage because these 3 guys on his side of the field could very well be gone. And you will get into them shortly. But these guys can be totally out of the picture. This guy can be out of the picture. And you can have this big window that, the corner doesn't have anybody to rely on. Maybe as late help once the catch is made and to rally and make that tackle. But he is not going to get help underneath in terms of actually passing the ball. So he needs to be in press alignment. Now, there's 2 big issues with the press alignment. Okay, and I think you probably already know them. Number 1 is that it's a dead giveaway. Okay, so let me just reset this. There are not many plays in this game, almost none, that if you come out in trips and it looks like this, that it's a different, right? That it's not immediately obvious that this is palms. Okay, so that's one consideration right here. It's like, okay, this is a dead giveaway. Because even if you're playing cover 9, right, that guy's 5 yards off the ball. There really aren't many plays where this guy's actually pressed up. Now, what's happening on the backside might be different. Like you might have cover 6 where you're playing cover 2 over here, but that's the other side of the field. On this side of the field, you see that corner pressed up and these guys not pressed up, and you're thinking, okay, this is palms. Let me get my palms beaters. Number 2, and maybe even more importantly, is the technique that the corner plays, in my opinion, isn't the right one. Okay, so he plays a hard press. So if I snap this ball right here, you see that he gets hands on the receiver, and in many cases he gets beat, right? Even if you get beat by a step, you can kind of float that ball over the top right into the hands of the receiver, and it's a basically easy one-play score right there. Okay, so all of the benefit that you get in terms of having that hard leverage, hard inside leverage on that receiver to help on drag routes and things like that is basically null and void because they can just take it over the top on you. Okay, now this may be changed. So the idea here is you want to have kind of a soft press from that corner, right? You don't want to be playing hard, hands on that receiver because you don't have help over the top, right? This isn't cover 2 man where you have the safety over the top. You have absolutely no help except for the sideline. So the hope here is that just like with the recent patch with college, unless I kind of misunderstood, but I think I did see it there, where he still has this alignment, but he doesn't have the hard press animation. He just basically, in a sense, like bails. Just to kind of simplify it, right? He doesn't get hands on it. It's basically like if I were to be man-to-man and I shade over the top, right? Then he's just running step for step, and I can't get that. So that's kind of what you want to see. Now, by doing that, you potentially aren't as good as you are on the drag route, like I showed you where he's completely smothering that drag route. But that's kind of the give and take right there, right? Would you maybe allow a half step on the drag just so you don't get beat on the fade over the top, right? There's kind of a give and take right there. And maybe towards the red zone, maybe you want to play a little bit more of a hard technique. But I think what the developers really should do is change this animation, because at any given point, and by the way, this is the stock coverage, this is the default alignment. At any given point, this is a one-play score waiting to happen. Now, there are a few considerations that you can make right here with the corner. Okay. Number 1, you can leave it like this, and you can play it as it is. If you have the ability to have a corner, and this is the difficulty here because you can't really play strong corner and weak corner. You have left corner and right corner. If you had a corner that had one of the deep knockout abilities, like say deep zone, out KO, whatever it is, you can be okay with getting beat over the top because you know that once that receiver catches it, that you'll be able to knock it out. Okay, in this case, he doesn't have it. The receiver is able to catch that. Okay, or maybe there is some ratings of high press and speed. Maybe you have a tall corner that can, even if they're beat, they can jump up and go snag that ball. Maybe if you have like pick artists, I don't know. I haven't really played around too much with that stuff, but there may be ways that you can just let this slide, knowing that even if you get beat by a step or a half step, that you can make up for that at the catch point. Okay, so that's one thing to say. The other thing is that you could play off, and there's a few different ways you can play off, but in this case, I'm just going to literally play him off. If you have some, like the ability, a couple of abilities, maybe the short KO abilities, or even like the outside shade ability, where he has a quicker reaction to underneath cuts. So in this case, he's just like you can think of him as like a truly great off man corner, right? And so he can react to those cuts underneath and be able to, despite the disadvantage that he has in terms of his initial leverage and what his assignment is and what's actually happening on the play, he can make up for that with, say, some KO ability or some faster step ability. But if you don't have that, then you're basically just going to get this all game long. Okay, and that's kind of a problem that you'll see if you are using, say, like the show 4 a coverage shell, the coverage disguise, right, where it's going to look kind of something like this, right, where you have the two high safeties and then you have the off corners, but and that's great because now this could be anything, right? It's not like the stock alignment where it's like, okay, that's definitely palms, but really you are giving away this leverage point. And so that can happen over and over again. And in reality, it does. A lot of people like to do those types of combinations. So that's a huge consideration here. The other consideration is that you can put this guy in an outside third. And this isn't super intuitive, but basically what this means is that he will play what is known as kind of like a mess technique. So he's playing man on everything except shallow. So if that right receiver runs deep or a post, anything like that, he's going to match him man to man. Even if that receiver runs a little out route or a little hitch, he's going to come down on that. But if he runs underneath, then he's going to let that go. So this is a coverage known as stump. And so in a way, this is how you would play special if you don't have good press corners. And just how we know with Madden, press is just a dangerous game. So I'm surprised that the developers didn't go for more of this type of thing, stump, which is truly 4/3. So you have 4 guys over 3. It's not 1 man-to-man and then you have 3/2. This is a 4/3 coverage. The problem with this, and this everything's great with the corner. The problem is that the underneath routes won't really adapt to it. So this probably won't make too much sense because I haven't gone over the rules of the other guys. But basically you can get into situations where nobody will be covering this guy and you can just get this type of thing. Okay? So the hope here is that, if there was a stump coverage in the game, the quarter flat would be able to come off of that. So it would basically look something like this. So he would kind of come off of that. And then obviously you see number 2 kind of being, butt naked down the field. But in that case, the corner would have to kind of replace him. And that's kind of the trade-off there. Doing match combinations 4/3 is difficult and can, really needs tight coordination. And it can lead to more busts. But also, if you don't have the guys to play pure man-to-man with absolutely no help, then that's also an issue. So I think I've been talking about this for like 15, 20 minutes or so. All that to say is number 1 is man-to-man. The corner is man-to-man on number 1, but there's a lot to consider there. And it kind of depends on the guy you have, kind of depends on the state of the game, but that's something to kind of keep your eye on, especially as patches go, title updates, new games, and things like that. For now, for me, I basically just run it. I do the show 4 alignment, which isn't here by stock. I just do the show 4 alignment and just say, okay, well, I'm going to be giving up those underneath routes. There's not much I can do there. Okay, so that's the corner. So that's man-to-man corner. Let's talk about the 3/2 that you get with the apex here, the hook, and the strong side safety right here. And I was moving around, so let's just go ahead and reset this. So the rules here, and I think probably a lot of people know them by now, but the rules are basically that you're playing, and I've mentioned it before, you're basically playing palms over number 2 and number 3. So you can think of it as that this is the safety of palms, and this guy is the corner of palms. So they'll have number 2 and 3 vertical. They'll have number 2 and 3 vertical, except this flat defender can come down like in a cover 2 fashion on number 3 if he goes flat. Okay, so if we go vertical, you'll see those 2 guys matching man-to-man, and the hook kind of stays underneath. Now let's go 3 to the flat. 3 to the flat, now what happens is that nickel corner will come down as you would expect in this kind of two read palms fashion, and then the safety would take over on his man. Again, exactly how you would expect it. The hook is basically responsible for anything that comes in the bottom left of that triangle. And same with a flat, right? So the hook is the bottom left of the triangle, the apex or the flat is the bottom right of the triangle. So if we get these kind of simple route combinations right here, those guys will handle those really quite easily. Okay. Now there's more to it than simply just who's got who, right? We already talked about the corner. He's got one really simple responsibility, but there's a lot to kind of dig into. And number one is, you might see it right away, is the alignment of the safety. For me, this guy is aligned too far outside. So he looks like he's kind of more aligned to number 2. But the issue here is that he has number 3 vertical. Okay, so, if number 3 were to run a post or deep crosser, something like that, this guy's kind of out leveraged, right? Like he's way over here, so how is he going to get in front of that route? So to me, if not kind of over here, he should really be splitting 2 and 3, right? Again, this is kind of a triangle type of coverage. You get bottom left, bottom right of that triangle, and this guy kind of adapts. He might be on number 3 vertical, he might be on number 2 vertical, but to me, the initial alignment is too far over to number 2. And now, depending on how the route goes and his quality and everything like that, he might still be able to get over. But what I find is that the receiver tends to be able to get a little bit of leverage on him. Okay. Now this particular route is kind of deep and it ends up going to the backside safety. But let's go with something like this, which is a bit more shallow. And if you get a good route right there, if you get a good pass right there, you can see that that could be a one-play score. So it's one thing to say that the safety, he has number 3 vertical and we should be fine. But it's another thing to say, like, what is his leverage point and what actually happens in the game? In this case, he has, a yard or 2 on that safety, and if it was a good throw with it from a good quarterback, you would rack catch that and walk into the end zone. Okay, so that's not ideal. The thing is with this game, though, is that even if I were to move this guy over here, and there are ways that you can do that nicely with, like, depending on what set you're in, you can kind of use the cover 3, the show 3 to your advantage just to get that guy kicked over in the right spot without having to manually move him over. But in this case, I believe he'll play this better, but these safeties tend to want to give up position inside. And so I think I'll still be able to, you see, it's basically the same thing. And I think in this case, I got a good animation. So there's a few things to say here. Number one, I don't know. And it probably also depends on the safety here. Shahid's pretty quick. I don't know about this safety. If you have a good safety, maybe if he has a deep out KO, you might be able to give up a step or 2. And once that receiver catches the ball, you can knock it out. Or maybe, you know what? I know it's kind of a difficult thing to do, but maybe you could just use it at safety, right? So you can use it at and really kick over here, make sure, that receiver is never getting that inside position over you. The other thing you'll notice is that this 3 receiver hook, although he's not matching, he does a good job of posting that 3 route. So at least you can't throw that right away. And if it is one of these kind of, deeper crossing routes where you don't get that much inside position on the safety, it can sometimes work out pretty nicely. But these like hot route, deep crossing routes, they can just basically torch this over and over again. If you have time in the pocket and a good quarterback, those are just touchdowns all day long. So that's one consideration is, this safety. The other thing is I believe he tends to kind of get beat on corner routes and things like that as well. So even in this case where you think he has leverage on number 3 on the corner route, I think he also tends to just lose here like that. So yeah, again, they actually do a good job of playing out the rules right here, but if you know what's coming and you're, in terms of you as an on the offense, if you know what defense is being played and you have good timing, things like that, you can still pick this apart, right? Just because the routes are matched appropriately doesn't mean your receiver isn't open still. So just keep that kind of all into consideration. So yeah, that safety, he does a good job matching 3 when he needs to vertically, or matching 2 when he needs to vertically, but I feel like in most cases he just ends up getting beat anyway. There's other things to consider with this kind of bottom right of the triangle right here, is this guy tends to want to drift underneath and play kind of an underneath leverage. And the issue there is that you can, in some cases, find room over the top. And I think in this case, I caught that ball, but I think the coverage is pretty good there. But there are cases, and I think maybe it depends on what route you use, where he'll kind of just want to take a step underneath. Actually, you know what? Maybe take that back. I kind of like that. But I don't know. I've seen cases where he kind of just, even though he's lined 5 yards off the ball, he'll just kind of let the receiver get a step or two past him, and you can just kind of throw that over the top. I still don't know. Maybe it depends on certain interactions, ratings, things like that. Something to watch out for, but basically what we saw right there, I think that was pretty good. What else do we want to talk about? Okay, so let's talk about situations where you have multiple routes going to one side right here. So in this case, like when I think of the apex defender right here, this guy's basically man-to-man. Unless 3 goes out right now, he's basically man-to-man on number 2, right? So if number 2 would go to flat, and I showed you that previously, he goes to the flat. If number 2 goes vertical, he goes with him. If number 2 goes underneath, there's a couple of considerations to make, right? So if number 2 goes underneath, he'll basically deliver him to the 3 receiver hook underneath. Okay? If that 3 receiver hook doesn't have anything to do. So if we were to have a double in situation right here, the 3 receiver hook has something to do. He has to match number 3 all the way across the field. So then the quarter flat also needs to match him, or match the other guy all the way across the field. But if the hook, or the bottom left of the triangle, doesn't have anything to match, then that the apex, the quarter flat, will deliver that underneath shallow route to that hook. Just like this. He'll kind of come off of him and he'll let him go. So that actually, all that logic works out quite well in terms of who has who. But the difficulty there, and you've seen it in these past few plays right here, is, guys just win regardless, right? Even though you have the leverage, even though things work out accordingly as they should in terms of just what's happening, the logic, guys are still losing. And let's just look at this case. Number 3 runs underneath, right? You have position. This guy has position. Let's even kick him inside a little bit. He has position, but just the tendency is that they just want to let these guys win anyway, right? And I don't know if that's like on purpose. Maybe that's on purpose because, to be honest, like if these match coverages were to work properly and have, maintain their leverage, it honestly might be too difficult for some people to pick apart. So I feel like maybe they're thinking, okay, let's have these guys get open anyway, even if the matching is good. So in that case, he just let him go. In some cases, he bumps into the will right here. So he bumps into the will right there, and you get even more space. So it's obviously not ideal. Now, as a user, I know I already talked about the safety, but as a user, you can just cut that off, right? Like you're never going to let that guy beat you, except in this case where I ran into the will. Okay, so it's not perfect even when you're using it. But anyway, that's something to consider. The other consideration, which I already showed you before, is where on the backside right here with the quarter flat, where he can't deliver that underneath route to the 3 receiver hook because he's getting matched the other way. Now in this case, this guy has outside leverage, right? So you would expect him to lose anyway, unfortunately. Maybe the safety could kind of slam down on that, but if the safety doesn't slam down on that, which he doesn't by default, but let's say even you as a user, you're kind of a little bit off. There is that window right here where you can kind of just chuck that in there and get a couple yards. And I think the quarter flat actually does a good job playing that, given the circumstances that he has outside shade, outside leverage. So you would expect him to lose in that case. So I'm happy with everything that happens there, but I just don't like how badly the 3 receiver hook loses. Let's talk about situations like double out. Double out, again, you have these situations, you have these triangle struggles with 2 routes going one particular way. Okay, I showed you how it struggled with 2 routes going in. This is how it struggles with 2 routes going out. Obviously, the hook will be out leveraged outside, right? So in this case, gets out leveraged. You can just throw this all game long. Okay, and again, I'm pretty happy with that. And maybe if you have a mid-zone KO on that guy, or if you're using him, you can make that more of a difficult throw. But that's just the case with these coverages, right? You only have so many guys. Now, again, I would like this guy to maybe get more involved. And you as a user, if you're thinking about maybe using the safety, you could see if you're reading number 2, he goes to the flat. You could say, okay, well, I could come down on this, right? So there's some big risk and reward, I guess, to playing the safety right there. Okay, so what else do we want to talk about here? Just looking at my notes. Yeah, I think like even there's some other things that I'm not super happy about. Like I think this quarter flat, I think he also tends to give up leverage. So let's do this type of situation where you would think he has outside leverage on this corner, but what actually happens after the play, he kind of cheats inside a little bit, kind of waiting for, the bender or the post or things like that. And then he ends up losing to the corner route right here. So that's kind of a bummer to me. Unlike something like cover 3 match, like if this guy was a seam flat, he plays a true outside technique right there. And you kind of let him get outside, but you see he was kind of stuck quite a bit better on there. So keep that in mind also. Like again, you would think that the bottom portion or the right portion of the triangle would maintain that outside leverage on that. But for whatever reason, he kind of cheats inside a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if that's intended or not, but another thing to kind of keep into consideration. Okay, a couple things to consider if you are using the 3 receiver hook. If you're using the 3 receiver hook, watch out for zig routes from number 3. Okay, zig routes for number 3, you would think this guy's a flat, and we have the bottom right of our triangle, which is that flat defender. You would think that we can pass that off to him, but because it's kind of an initial inside break and it kind of cuts outside late. What ends up happening is that the flat doesn't come down on that, right? So if you're usering expecting that somebody to kind of help out there, he's not going to be there. Okay, and what's nice is that the CPU actually does a good job on that. They see it's an inside break, they'll match. They lose leverage, but at least they match. And it kind of makes sense again. The hook has inside leverage. He's going to get beat outside. Okay, but you as a user, you kind of need to keep that in mind. And I've actually been burnt by that quite a few times, where I just assume I have a flat defender over there, but really that's a sharp inside route. Even if he breaks out eventually, that's really my guy. I should take him all the way there. So definitely keep that into consideration. I think similarly with like returns, like let's see if number 3 runs a return, so he's sharp outside, then breaks inside. I think in this case that'll draw the flat. So you see now he comes down on it. And he plays that probably way better than I would expect to, so we'll take that. Again, there's some situations where you have the leverage and you lose the leverage in this game. There's other situations where you don't have the leverage and you gain it back. And so there's kind of a give and take there in terms of benefit and disadvantages there. But that's another thing to consider there, where this guy is running a return, and then let's say we have what do we want to do? I really wish we still had hitches in this game. This type of situation, let's actually see what happens right here. I think that'll take the flat. And so you would actually have to swap and take that little hitch. Now, will you see that route combination? I'm not sure. But there's some weird things that you can do as an offense. And I think this is kind of a lot of what you tend to see in the game today. A lot of these kind of gray routes that kind of mess with the pattern distribution. And, you know, I really have to give the developers a lot of credit. These coverages have gotten a lot more solid over the years to this certain point, where sometimes you might have a difficult route combination and you get kind of a weird swap in terms of who matches who, but you almost never, and like I don't know of a single situation right here where you get somebody completely free, especially deep. A few years ago we had so many of those, whether you're running quarters or palms or the cover 2 match stuff or the cover 3 match stuff, where you could easily get guys just completely free for a touchdown. That's just no longer the case, which is great. Now, and as you see kind of from my videos where we're going over the nitty gritty, the minutia, the leverage points, any other kind of weird consideration, shouldn't say weird, but fine considerations, you have some things that could be improved on, but at least we're not talking about big, huge busts for one play scores. So that's really great. That's what I'm really happy about. Okay, so that's, I think, basically everything you need to know about these guys. Again, it's man-to-man over here on the corner. Quite a few considerations there in terms of what his alignment is and who he is, what kind of abilities he has, ratings, and that type of thing. If you want to truly play special coverage, this guy needs to be able to play man coverage. And whether that's he's great at press or you back him off and he has some of these other abilities like outside shade or short zone knockout, things like that, you need to have that kind of sorted out, because unlike the real life college game or the real life high school game, that number one is certainly a viable threat. And you can't just say we're going to cross him out and the quarterback can't get the ball out there. He can definitely get the ball out there. And so you got to make sure you have an actual plan for that. And then you have 3/2. You have just kind of your classic triangle coverage. Plays out a little bit differently. Not every triangle coverage is the same, but by and large, you have a bottom left, a bottom right, and a top. And kind of depends on who you want to user. But I don't know, for me, I'm starting to think more and more about this safety, where if my opponent wants to send 2 routes in one direction, naturally, if they're sending them inside, I'm going to have leverage on the inside, but I'm going to lose leverage over here. And so the only way I can gain that back is to kind of slam down with the safety. Likewise, if they're going outside, I have leverage out here. I'll lose leverage here, but I can gain that back by slamming down the safety. Now, again, that kind of requires some good user work. And in some cases, you might lose leverage anyway. Like I showed you with a few times where this 3-receiver hook loses leverage. And I'm still kind of plugging around, seeing if that's a ratings thing, see if you can get a good linebacker here that doesn't just kind of let drags pass him. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer for that. But anyway, that's all it is. I'll save this for another video. This kind of triangle over here where you have these 3 over the backside 2. I think, again, similar with the man coverage on the front side of this, it seems simple, but there's actually a lot of things to talk about there. Anyway, let's end this off with a couple run game considerations right here. And let me just reset the play so that everything's nicely aligned. So what you'll find here is, let's say I'm running over front right here. Okay, and an over front against trips, not Y trips, but trips, is going to align to the back. So depending on how you kind of talk about this, it's actually in some ways an under front. It's under to the passing strength, but over to the run strength, which is just the running back over here. So you have the 3 tech on the left right here, and you have 2I on the right here. You have 2 edges, boxing things in, and you have this will linebacker that's plugging A gap. And so you have a bubble in the front side B gap. But what's nice right here, and what's nice about running this coverage, is that this 3 receiver hook doesn't need to match anybody vertical, right? Sure, there is some responsibility to wall off number 3 so that the safety can make his way over. So you don't want to just, be right here and let that number 3 run over your head. You still need to kind of have some responsibility there. Not to mention if he was to run a hitch, you want to be there, that type of thing. But the benefit here is that although you're not directly aligned in that B gap, and though you're not technically in the box, you're kind of in this hip position. And I went over this in 2x2 palms, which is similar to the weak side, the will quarter flat, where he's aligned inside of the number 2 receiver, but he's close enough to the box that he can fold inside and still plug the B gap. And so that's the case right here as well. So if we go into inside zone, I'm not too far off from the B gap where I can just kind of shoot in here. And in the end, I ended up getting picked up, but I was still kind of closing that gap. So let's run that a few times. If you run this right, oh yeah, this guy starts coming out right now. But in any case, that was fine. So you see, not too far off. We have the C gap plugged. We have the B gap plugged. We have the A gap plugged. And basically, the running back has nowhere to go. So he could bounce this with the hope that our edge would still be able to kind of pick him up. Not to mention you have, likely a shed over here. You could cut it back, but you have the will that's right here, basically completely unblocked, waiting for things to cut back so you can make the tackle. What I've noticed is in previous years and even earlier, I don't know if it's just this particular trips, but usually how this plays out is that the center works back, the center and the guard work back to the will, and the will gets blocked, but the Mike who's folding into the B gap gets completely unblocked. So I don't know why exactly this happens this way, but in most cases, you're going to be completely unblocked coming in and you'll get a tackle. This case, it was fine as well. We plugged our gap and the running back has nowhere to go. If you were to bounce it out, the will would be there to tackle him. So I don't know if it's just I was a little bit even too close to the box, or if it's something new happened that for whatever reason the guard is picking me up. And that's probably good for the offense. I think that works out better for the offense. But anyway, this is a pretty good run defense. But things change if there's a tight end. Okay, if we're talking about Y trips now, let's go back to palms. And let's go to Y trips. Weak. So Y trips weak, that's no longer the case. So Y trips weak, we are in the box. And we have a C gap defender. We have now the will is a backside B gap. We have our nose, which is our 2 gap, which is our 2I, which is our A gap. We have the mic. We have the B gap, the 3 technique right here, and then we have a D gap defender. So what that means is we have a conflict right here where basically we're responsible for the A gap and the C gap right here. So we're not fitting out the box. So who's going to be that last fitter? So we no longer have this nice situation with trips where we can be aligned, covered down on number 3 and fold into the B gap. Now we're ready in the box. Who's going to be that other box fitter? Well, the corners, obviously, they won't be. This quarter flat is lined outside, needs to cover number 2 vertical. He's out of the picture. So really you have 2 situations right here. Do you have the safety, who by default is kind of aligned here closer to number 2? You can kind of bring him more inside, but keep in mind that, he also needs to potentially cover number 2 running a corner. So let's say this guy's you're saying, okay, we're going to fill the B gap here, the A gap here, and this guy's responsible for the C gap. Well, you can get into situations like this. Okay, let's even forget about play action. Like, especially in college, play action is actually a big thing. So this guy can get absolutely roasted. But now in this situation where he needs to cover number 2 to the corner route, he's going to be completely out leveraged, right? So that's a consideration right there. So then really all that you're left with is that what you should kick over is this way. So the Mike is the C gap defender. This guy is the A gap defender. And keep in mind, you're already maybe stretching yourself a little bit thin where this guy needs to play the back to the flat. And then now the backside safety is the C gap defender right here. But then with this guy being down so much, then he can't really help so much on number one. It's more of a one-to-one matchup over there. So you already kind of start to kind of come across even more considerations with this coverage. And that's always the case, right? It's not just purely coverage. There's always a run game element involved. But the problem here with the nickel being outside leverage on number two is that you can't use him in the run game, right? You can, okay, like if you look at the run fits, he's in the fit, but in reality, he's not. He's outside of number two. He has to carry him vertical. Effectively, he's not in the fit. So your only options are your safeties. And the strong safety really can't be because he needs to be out here. So your only option is to bring down this backside safety. And that could be fine, but just know what you're getting into. Now, one final last piece, I want to talk about big nickel over G, because although these are two nickel over defenses, there's one key difference between these two, and that's the alignment of the defensive end on the strong side. So you see the difference here, these guys, same thing. Edge, C-gap, 2-eye, 3 technique. But now, rather than this guy playing out here outside the tight end, he is inside the tight end. So now you get into this situation where you are gapped out, and rather than the safety needing to play in the C gap, he's playing in the D gap. So now it makes sense for him to be over here, being the top hat of the triangle, right? You have the bottom left, bottom right, and the top, and he's basically aligned perfectly into his gap. Okay, so there is an advantage here of running big nickel over G. The funny thing actually is that with big nickel over G, you see just beautiful fits. The funny thing with big nickel over G is that the alignment of the safety is actually, to me, maybe a little bit better. He's aligned over number 3. So if number 3 were to run vertical, he's right there rather than being aligned over number 2 and being out leveraged. But again, this guy, it's not just number 3, he's potentially over 2. So in both cases, I think it's not great. I think this guy should be aligned between 3 and number 2. Maybe a little bit biased over one way or the other, but I think kind of between them is the sweet spot, at least to me. One final thing. The other is like, it's nice right here. We're gapped out in here, B gap over here, A gap. All of these guys are fit out. We just need to fill that edge. And in this case, that can be the safety. The problem here, again, is that, okay, he can fill this. In reality, he still needs to be kind of a little bit safer because he could be running number 3 vertical down the field or number 2 vertical down the field. So back to my initial point that I wish they gave us a true palms against trips, because what you can do then in that case is that you could show 2, and I'll need to actually just reset this so I can kind of show you what I meant. If they had palms in this game, you could show 2, and you could play 3 over 2 over here, and this guy, in my opinion, would be a better fit for the edge gap right here than the safety. And then now the number 3, who by the way now is attached to the line and isn't as vertical of a threat as I showed you with the detached trips, he can be kind of better covered by this backside safety right here. So in my opinion, that would be kind of a nice option to have. But we don't. You can kind of get this with cover 9, but the problem with cover 9 is that this guy's then a vertical hook. Oh, I can't get that here. But this guy's a vertical hook in cover 9, and he needs to match number 2 vertically. So he can't be as aggressive as you can with palms, because palms, this guy, he can leave number 2 flat to the corner. He doesn't need to carry anybody vertical. He can really be a hard edge for the run game right here, and really well suited for big nickel over G, where again, this edge is kicked inside to the C gap rather than D gap, and this guy is kind of this safety body where he's, you know, more naturally suited for the run game. Okay, so again, you know, lots of considerations, lots of rambling, you know, probably even left some things out that were on my mind that I probably should have said, but it's already been an hour. There's only so much we can go over. But that special coverage, or stubby if you want to call it, we'll be going over probably the front side of quarters, which is, still don't know if it's kind of, if you'd call it solo approach. I need to kind of look into it a little bit more. And then we'll be talking about the backside of this as well. And then probably moving on to some other coverages and some other videos that are kind of more along the lines of, okay, this is what happens in these coverages. What now? What do we do with them to make them great? But I hope you guys like this, and we'll see you in the next one.